In the heart of America, on a night shrouded in mystery, a man named Lucas, a simple convenience store employee in a small town, decided that the monotony of his life needed a change. He had always been a dreamer, seeking something deeper and more meaningful in his existence, but the reality of life kept him trapped in an endless routine. That night, while closing the store, Lucas felt a strange sensation that something was about to happen, something that would challenge him to face his fears. The town of Maplewood, surrounded by dense forests and ancient legends, held secrets that few dared to explore. The whispered stories about children with black eyes who appeared on dark nights always intrigued Lucas. He remembered hearing the elders talk about these mysterious beings, their voices echoing in the empty streets, warning the young about the lurking danger. But like many, Lucas was skeptical. He believed they were just fairy tales meant to scare children. That night, as he left the store, he decided it was time to investigate. Curiosity guided him into the forest, where the darkness seemed denser and the sounds of nature fell silent. He walked among the trees, feeling the cold breeze that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. After a few minutes, he spotted a small clearing illuminated only by the moonlight. It was there that the atmosphere began to change. The air grew heavier, as if something was present, watching him. It was then that, in the middle of the clearing, Lucas saw two children. They stood still, dressed in dark clothing with unkempt hair. What struck him most were their eyes, deep black eyes, devoid of shine, like holes that absorbed all the light around them. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine, but curiosity kept him rooted in place. He approached, unable to tear his gaze away from those shadowy orbs. "Help us," one of the children, a girl, whispered, her voice echoing inside Lucas's head, penetrating his thoughts. He hesitated, his survival instinct battling against the desire to understand. The other child, a boy, looked at him with a desperate expression, but there were no human emotions in his eyes. The connection Lucas felt was instant and disturbing. He remembered the stories he had heard, the warnings. These were not just dreams, they were warnings. Fear began to creep into his mind, but so did compassion. He wanted to help, to understand what those children needed. But as he approached, a sense of dread deepened in his heart. "Please, get in the car," the girl said, gesturing to a vehicle that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, parked at the edge of the clearing. Lucas looked at the car, an old rusty van, and felt an urge to back away. But their voices held him, as if he were being pulled into a nightmare from which he could not escape. He remembered stories of people who got into strangers' cars and were never seen again. Adrenaline began to pump through his veins. No, he couldn't let himself be taken. "No, I can't," he said, his voice trembling. The children exchanged glances, and Lucas realized that something had changed. The desperation in their eyes turned to anger, and the atmosphere around him seemed to thicken. "You have no choice," the boy said, his voice now firmer, more threatening. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine, and the need to run became uncontrollable. He turned and began to flee, not looking back. The forest seemed to have transformed into a labyrinth, every shadow stretching out as if to grasp him. As he ran, the sounds of the forest became distorted, as if the world itself were turning against him. He could feel the presence of the children behind him, an invisible force following him, and the sensation that their black eyes were penetrating his mind, trying to capture him. He needed to find a safe place, a refuge from what he could not understand. Finally, Lucas spotted the lights of the town in the distance. He rushed toward them, his heart racing. Upon reaching the safety of his store, he locked the door and leaned against it, breathless. The silence felt deafening, but he knew he was not alone. The gaze of the children still haunted him, and the feeling that they were waiting for him in the darkness consumed him. In the following days, Lucas couldn't get those children out of his mind. He tried to ignore the experience, but the black eyes continued to haunt him. He wondered if he should tell someone, but he knew no one would believe his story. The town of Maplewood was no stranger to tales of disappearances and urban legends, but he didn't want to become just another victim of a story that no one would want to hear. One night, while at home, a knock on the door made him freeze. His heart raced in his chest. He hesitated, remembering the children and what they had said. Cautiously, he approached the door and looked through the peephole. To his surprise, there were two children. He couldn't believe it. It was them again. The black eyes were there, penetrating, cold, and filled with a need he couldn't comprehend. "Let us in," they said in unison, and Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He knew there was something terrible waiting for him, but curiosity and fear clashed within him. What did they really want? Was it an invitation or a condemnation? He wondered if he was prepared for what was about to happen, knowing that if he opened the door, there would be no turning back. That night, the line between reality and the supernatural would become even more tenuous, and Lucas would discover that some stories are not just fairy tales meant to scare children, but bloody warnings about what might lurk in the shadows. He was about to embark on a journey that would challenge his sanity and reveal the horrors that inhabit the shadows of his own city. Lucas, paralyzed in front of the door, hesitated. His heart raced erratically, and adrenaline surged through his veins. He looked into the black eyes waiting for him on the other side, feeling an irresistible yet terrifying pull. It was the same feeling that had accompanied him in the forest, the blend of fear and curiosity that drew him toward the unknown. He took a deep breath, trying to muster his courage. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice trembling. The children did not respond immediately. Their expressions remained unchanged, with the same intensity that haunted him. The girl stepped forward and repeated, "Let us in." Lucas knew that opening the door meant surrendering to something he did not understand. He remembered the stories he had heard about children with black eyes, how they lured their victims and took them to a place from which no one ever returned. But the need to understand what was happening, to unravel the mystery that had formed around him, was stronger. With a sudden movement, he opened the door. "Come in," he said, and immediately regretted it. The children crossed the threshold, and the atmosphere in the room seemed to change instantly. The air grew colder, and a palpable tension filled the space. Lucas quickly closed the door, almost slamming it. He turned to face them, a mix of fear and determination in his gaze. What do you want from me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're here to ask for help," replied the boy, his voice now softer but still laden with an unsettling urgency. "A danger is approaching. You can help us stop it." Lucas furrowed his brow. "A danger? How do you know this?" Incredulity seeped into every word. He couldn't believe he was having this conversation with two children who had, until recently, been nothing more than urban legends in his mind. "You saw what happened in the forest," the girl said, her black eyes fixed on his. "We are not what you think. We are not just children. We are something more. And we need you." Lucas felt his sanity slipping. He needed answers, but logic was beginning to fail. "What do you mean by something more?" he questioned, his voice now almost a whisper. The boy looked at his sister, and she nodded. "We are the guardians of the forest. An ancient force has been awakened, and it is coming to Maplewood. You are the key to preventing this from happening." "Me?" Lucas echoed, skepticism still present in his voice. "How could I help? I'm just a store clerk." "Because you are the only one who had the courage to face us. Only someone who is not a blind believer can see the truth," said the girl, her voice now almost hypnotic. "You are stronger than you think, but we need you to trust us. Time is running out." Nkum. What they were saying seemed absurd, but there was something in the way they spoke that made him hesitate. The weight of responsibility began to settle in his chest. He couldn't simply ignore the possibility that something really was threatening his town, even if he couldn't fully comprehend what it was. But how can I help? What do I need to do? Lucas decided, despite the fear growing inside him. The choice to get involved brought him to a new level of anxiety, but also determination. He could no longer hide from reality. The children exchanged glances, and a look of relief crossed the girl's face. "We need you to follow us back to the forest. There is something there that you need to see, something that leads us to what is approaching." Before he could protest, the boy took Lucas's hand, and in an instant he felt a wave of energy coursing through his body. It was a strange sensation, as if the child were connecting him to something greater. "You will see what we need you to see. It is not just a legend, Lucas. It is the truth." With a mix of fear and expectation, Lucas allowed himself to be guided out of the house and into the darkness of the night. The shadows of the forest seemed denser and more threatening than ever, but at the same time there was a faint glimmer of hope in his heart. He was about to discover what was truly at stake. As they walked, Lucas realized that the forest was alive, as if the trees were watching him, their leaves whispering secrets he could not understand. The path seemed to shift, winding erratically, and each step took him deeper into a world that defied logic. He began to feel that reality was fading away, giving way to a dimension where the supernatural became tangible. The children led him to a familiar clearing, the same one where he had first encountered them. However, the atmosphere was now different. A thick fog enveloped the place, and an otherworldly light danced among the trees. Lucas's heart raced, and he felt a chill run down his spine when he noticed a figure sculpted in the mist, a massive shadow that seemed to twist and shape itself into grotesque forms. "This is what is coming," the boy whispered, his voice tense. "An ancient entity fed by fear and pain. It seeks darkness to fully manifest. We need to stop it." Lucas looked around, terrified, and asked, "How?" The answer did not come, but the shadow in the mist began to materialize, revealing terrifying shapes that stretched and contracted, as if they were feeding off the very darkness around them. "Focus! You need to believe!" the girl shouted, her words cutting through the fog like a blade. "You are the only hope." As fear grew in his chest, Lucas closed his eyes and concentrated. He didn't know what he was about to do, but he knew he couldn't back down. He felt a wave of energy building inside him, a force that defied his own understanding. And so, he prepared to face the approaching shadow, not only in search of answers, but for the very salvation of Maplewood. Lucas felt the cold mist wrapping around him like a second skin, his breath becoming heavier. The shadow before him pulsed as if it were alive, and the presence of that ancient entity seemed to press against his chest, making his heart race and his mind fill with doubts. He looked at the children, who seemed so small against the magnitude of what was approaching. The boy was trembling slightly, but the girl, with her fixed and determined gaze, seemed more confident than ever. "You need to remember, Lucas," she insisted, with an urgency that made him shudder. "The fear you feel is what it feeds on. Don't let it control you." But her words didn't seem strong enough to push away the terror that surrounded him. He remembered the forest, the stories he had heard about the children with black eyes, and the force that inhabited that place. What had he done to deserve this? He was just a store clerk, an ordinary man caught in a nightmare. The shadow, now more tangible, began to twist, revealing distorted faces that seemed to scream in silence. Lucas hesitated, his will to fight slowly eroded by uncertainty. He remembered his past, the missing children, the legends that had never been fully dispelled. That entity could very well be linked to all of this. A deep sense of helplessness washed over him. He didn't have the power or resources to confront something so monstrous. "Focus!" the girl shouted, a thread of desperation in her voice. "You are stronger than this!" Lucas tried, but memories began to surface. He recalled his childhood, moments when fear dominated him, the shadows that danced in his room, the whispers that followed him, the children who disappeared from town. He remembered one of them, a girl with brown hair who used to play in the street. He never knew what really happened to her. Was she part of the force that was now approaching, a lost soul seeking revenge? "I can't," Lucas exclaimed, his voice faltering under the weight of panic. "I'm not a hero." "You don't need to be a hero," the boy replied, his black eyes shining with an intensity that seemed to cut through the mist. "You just need to be yourself." The shadow leaned forward as if listening to his words, and Lucas felt a wave of despair. What was this entity really? What did it want? A part of him wanted to run, but another part, the part that wanted to understand, stood firm. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. So, with colossal effort, he decided to face the truth. He needed to understand what was at stake. He took a step forward, feeling the energy around him pulse strongly. "If you are as ancient as they say, then show me what you want." His voice echoed in the clearing, and the shadow seemed to hesitate, as if assessing his determination. "Lucas, don't look directly at it," the girl warned, but it was too late. He had already allowed himself to be drawn in by the allure of that dark presence. The shadow twisted, and Lucas felt a sharp pain in his mind, as if the entity were trying to invade his thoughts. He saw flashes of images, the missing girl, the legends he had heard, the pain and sorrow of a town that had lost so much. It was as if the entity were feeding on his memories, on his fear, forcing him to relive every moment of anguish and loss he had tried to bury. "Think, Lucas. Fight against this," the boy shouted, but Lucas was already struggling against the tide of emotions. He found himself lost in a maze of memories and feelings, the shadows of the past beginning to intertwine with the present, and in a moment of clarity, he realized the entity was not just a force of evil, it was a manifestation of what had been done to those children, an echo of their pains and fears. That shadow was the sum of all the tragedies that had occurred in Maplewood, a reflection of what the town hid beneath its surface. "You can't control me," Lucas shouted, his voice rising, breaking the spell the shadow was trying to cast over him. Determination began to replace fear, and in doing so, he felt a new energy rising within him. "I won't let you keep hurting people." The shadow reacted to his refusal, twisting more violently, but Lucas stood firm. He felt that no matter how much he was facing an apparently invincible force, there was something inside him beginning to ignite. It was the understanding that he was not alone, that those children needed him, and he needed them. "Together, we can face it," he said, looking into the black eyes of his companions. "Let's unite." And in that moment, Lucas began to understand the true nature of the conflict before him. It wasn't just about battling an entity, it was a struggle to confront the past, to free the souls that had been trapped in pain and fear. He was not just a store clerk, he was the key to Maplewood's redemption. And with that revelation, he was about to discover the true strength that resided within him. Lucas's determination began to transform into an intense glow, a light that seemed to radiate from his being, and he felt the shadow hesitating in the face of that new force. The boy and girl beside him also seemed to be illuminated, as if their courage had intertwined with his. But before they could move forward together, a new wave of darkness spread through the clearing. A low, sinister laugh echoed around them, and Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. The shadow expanded, revealing distorted shapes that seemed to twist and multiply, as if the very earth was rising against them. The trees around them, once silent, began to creak and sway, as if they were part of the entity, joining that terrifying force. "You don't understand, Lucas," a deep voice whispered, seeming to come from all sides at once. "You are just a fragment of what I am. Your memories, your fears, they feed me, and now you are about to become part of me." Lucas felt his heart race again. He had believed that his determination was enough to face that force, but now he understood he was dealing with something much more complex and terrifying than he had imagined. That shadow was not just an echo of Maplewood's tragedies. It was an entity that fed on fear and pain, a parasite that had rooted itself in the town and its stories. "No, you won't swallow me," Lucas shouted, but the shadow had already begun to twist towards him, and he realized that the light emanating from him was fading, suffocated by the encroaching darkness. The girl beside him began to retreat, her eyes filled with terror. "Lucas, we have to get out of here," she pleaded, but Lucas was unwilling to give up. He couldn't, not now that he understood the true nature of that struggle. The shadow, now closer, revealed a horrifying image, faces of missing children that Lucas recognized from the stories he had heard, their expressions distorted in a mixture of pain and anger. He saw the brown-haired girl, and despair washed over him. "What do you want from us?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the darkness. "I want you to understand," the shadow replied, its voice clearer now. "You are part of this. You have always been part of this. Every child that disappeared, every tear shed, every lament echoing in the forest. You, with your memories, are the key to my freedom." And at that moment, Lucas realized that the shadow did not just want to feed on his fear. It wanted him to become a vessel for its own pain and suffering, a new bearer of the tragedies that had plagued the town. He felt his body tremble at the revelation. The truth was darker than he had imagined. "You can't turn me into something I'm not," Lucas exclaimed, his voice now a mixture of anger and desperation. But the shadow was already beginning to infiltrate his mind, the voices of those children intensifying, pleading for justice, for recognition. The mist around him began to stir, and Lucas saw a series of horrifying visions, children being taken, laughter turning into screams, and the faces of desperate parents searching for their lost children. The entire town was under the dominion of that entity, and Lucas realized that what he had done to confront it was just the beginning of a much larger battle. "Lucas, don't let it in you," the boy shouted, but the warning sounded distant, as if being consumed by the encroaching darkness. Lucas felt his very being pulled into a spiral of despair, and the light that once emanated from him began to flicker. He fought against the wave of memories, trying to remember what truly mattered. Then amidst the chaos, a new idea emerged in his mind. It was not just about facing the shadow, but understanding what had caused its existence. He needed to release those trapped spirits, not just to win the fight, but to free the town from its burden. "I know what you are," Lucas shouted, his voice now stronger. "You are the pain we ignored, the voices we did not hear. I will not let you continue to consume our souls." The shadow hesitated for a brief moment, and Lucas realized he had reached a critical point. He remembered the children who had disappeared, the whispers that had followed him. He needed to become a beacon of hope, not fear. With a colossal effort, Lucas began to loudly recite the names of the missing children, one by one, like a ritual of liberation. With each name spoken, the shadow seemed to twist and scream, as if trying to resist the truth that was being revealed. "I will not forget you. I will not let your memories be erased," he continued, feeling the energy within him intensify. With each name, he felt a part of the town's pain being acknowledged, a small victory against the shadow threatening to consume them. But the shadow was not ready to surrender. It began to expand, and Lucas realized that the battle was far from over. What had started as a fight against a terrifying entity was now transforming into a struggle for the very essence of Maplewood. The memories, the children, the pain. All of it was intertwined in a conflict that promised to intensify, and Lucas knew he and his friends would need all the strength and courage they could muster. As the mist grew thicker, Lucas prepared for what was to come, determined not only to confront the shadow, but to dismantle the web of pain it represented. The true fight was just beginning, and he was no longer alone. Lucas's determination was growing, but the shadow was becoming ever more oppressive, like a storm about to break. He felt his light flicker, and the images of the missing children continued to haunt him, each face a reminder of the burden they carried. As he recited the names in an effort to liberate them, the darkness stirred, and the sinister laughter of the entity reverberated in his ears. "You really think you can defeat me with mere names?" the shadow taunted, its voice deep and seductive. "You are only feeding my strength." Lucas, however, could not stop. He felt the psychological pressure intensifying. With each name he uttered, the pain he felt became more palpable. He was not just fighting against the shadow, he was confronting his own fears, his doubts. What would happen if he failed? What would happen to the memories of those children? And if he became part of the darkness, like so many others before him? "Lucas, this isn't going to work," shouted the boy beside him, his eyes wide with despair. "We need a plan, something more than just remembering." The entity's voice intertwined with Lucas's thoughts, trying to divert his focus. "You are weak, Lucas. Look around you. The darkness has always been here. You cannot fight against something that is already part of you." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine as the shadow's words pierced his mind. He began to question his choices, whether he truly had the capacity to face such a force. What would happen if he failed to save those souls? The struggle was not just for him, but for all those the shadow had consumed. The darkness around him began to twist into grotesque shapes, and Lucas realized that his attempts were only feeding the entity. It was as if each whispered name was a drop of blood in a sea of despair. He needed to find another way, but what could he do? The answer seemed to elude him, as elusive as the children he was trying to remember. As he fought against the growing sense of impotence, a new wave of images flooded his mind. He saw flashes of an ancient library, dusty books and torn pages, all filled with accounts of the children of Maplewood. He recalled a story he had once heard about a ritual that could free those trapped between worlds. Maybe there is a way to help them, Lucas thought, his mind beginning to clear. If the shadow fed on pain, perhaps he could use the knowledge of the city's stories against it, but that would require a sacrifice. "We need to find the library," Lucas exclaimed, already moving towards the looming darkness. "If we can discover how to free these souls, maybe we can defeat the shadow once and for all." The boy and girl hesitated, but Lucas's determination seemed to be contagious. They began to follow him, even as the darkness closed in around them. With each step, the shadow's laughter grew more intense, as if it were enjoying their obstinacy. "You are fools," the shadow roared, its voice now a growl. "There is no escape for you. Pain is your inheritance, and I will be your fate." But Lucas did not let himself be disheartened. He knew that the library could be the key to understanding what was truly happening in Maplewood. As they advanced, the trees twisted, and the voices of the missing children echoed in their ears, each trying to warn them of the impending danger. "Lucas, this is a trap!" the girl screamed, looking around in panic. "We can't go on!" "We have to take the risk," Lucas insisted, his voice firm. "If we don't try, we'll never know." As they approached the library, the shadow loomed before them like a wall of darkness, blocking their path. It contorted into a humanoid shape, with eyes that glowed like embers. "Do you really think you can challenge me? I am the fear that dwells within each of you. If you advance, you will become part of me." Lucas felt the weight of its words, but instead of retreating, a wave of courage enveloped him. He remembered the children, the faces he had seen, and the smiles that had been erased. "I will not let you continue like this," he shouted, the light beginning to emanate from him again, stronger than ever. But what he did not expect was that the shadow would also have a trick up its sleeve. The darkness spread, enveloping Lucas and his friends in a suffocating embrace. He felt his memories being pulled away, one by one, as if the entity were trying to tear his essence away. The voices of the children became a deafening scream. "You can't fight against what you are," the shadow whispered, its tone more seductive than ever. "You are part of me and always will be." Lucas felt tears streaming down his face. Terror was about to engulf him, but deep in his heart a spark of hope persisted. If he could find that library, maybe he could uncover the truth and use that power against the shadow. He took a deep breath, determined not to let the darkness win. "Let's go forward," he shouted, holding his friends' hands, his strength renewed. Together they plunged into the darkness, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The battle would not be easy, but Lucas knew that if he wanted to save the lost souls, he would need to find the light within his own pain and transform it into hope. The pressure on Lucas increased with every passing second. He and his friends were surrounded by darkness, the shadow twisting and expanding around them like a predator about to strike its prey. The weight of responsibility crushed his chest, and he felt each breath becoming more difficult. The entity's voice echoed in his mind, a mantra of doubt that threatened to crumble his determination. "You are weak, Lucas. You can't save anyone. They are all lost, and you are too." He fought against the wave of despair trying to engulf him, but the vision of the missing children blended with his own memories, creating a whirlwind of guilt and pain. He recalled moments when he felt powerless, when he couldn't protect those he loved. The shadow seemed to know exactly where to strike, to inflict the most damage. "Why can't you just give up?" the entity whispered, its voice smooth as silk but laced with poison. "You are not a hero. You are just a boy lost in a world that isn't yours." Lucas's internal conflict intensified. He wanted to believe he could make a difference, but every word from the shadow echoed his deepest insecurities. What would happen if he failed? What would happen to the souls that depended on him? The weight of guilt suffocated him, and he found himself on the brink of giving up. But deep down, a voice still resonated, insisting that he could not surrender. "We need to keep going," he shouted, though his own voice trembled. "We can't let it win." His friends' eyes were fixed on him, filled with fear, but also hope. They were ready to follow him, even in the face of the darkness that threatened to consume them. Lucas then remembered the library, the knowledge it might hold. If there was a way to free those souls, he needed to find it, and the only way to do that was to confront the shadow. The darkness began to stir, and a storm of voices rose, screams of pain and despair echoing in their minds. It was as if the city itself was manifesting against them. The trees swayed, and the wind howled, bringing with it a sense of hopelessness. Lucas felt panic rise within him, but at the same time, a spark of determination began to shine brighter. "Come on, we need to get to the library," he exclaimed. "If the shadow feeds on our pain, we need to use that to our advantage. Let's uncover the truth." The shadow, sensing the new intensity in Lucas, lunged forward like a tsunami about to swallow everything. "Do you really think you can challenge me? You are just lost children, and I am the darkness that consumes. There is no truth that can save you." Lucas felt the impact of the entity's words, a wave of despair threatening to knock him down. But looking at the faces of his friends, something within him solidified. He was not alone. They were more than just children. They were a group united by a common purpose, and together they could face this dark force. "We need to focus," he shouted, his voice echoing in the darkness. "Trust me, let's go together." With that, they pressed on, each step becoming a battle against the shadow's oppression. Lucas felt the pressure mounting, but at the same time, the light within him began to shine more brightly. It was as if every drop of hope, every happy memory he held, was a weapon against the darkness. The shadow, realizing its influence was being challenged, launched an attack. A deafening scream tore through the air as the darkness tried to envelop them completely. Lucas felt the pressure against his body, as if he were being crushed, but he refused to succumb. "Focus on the children," he ordered, closing his eyes for a moment. He began to recite the names again, but this time it was not just an act of remembrance, it was a call to action. He was evoking the strength of hope that those children represented, and the shadow began to hesitate. "You can't," the entity screamed, its voice now filled with frustration. "I am part of you, and I always will be." Lucas felt the truth of the shadow's words, but at the same time, he realized he was not defined by his weaknesses. He could be part of the darkness, but he could also choose to be light. "I'm not alone," he said, looking at his friends. "We are stronger together." And so, as the shadow writhed, Lucas and his friends united their voices, forming a chorus of determination. They were resolved not to let the darkness consume them. Light emanated from within them, and the shadow, which once seemed invincible, began to recede, as if being burned by the flame of hope. The battle was far from over, but Lucas felt the tide beginning to turn. The library was within reach, and the truth was about to be revealed. He knew he would have to make difficult choices, but with his friends by his side, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The struggle was just beginning, and the darkness, though powerful, could not extinguish the light they carried within them. The pressure increased, like a drum beating in unison with the hearts of Lucas and his friends. The library loomed before them, an imposing silhouette against the pulsing darkness that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. The air was heavy, laden with unspoken secrets and fears. The shadow, now more agitated than ever, writhed around them like a wounded animal, furious and determined to keep them from their goal. "You don't know what you're doing," the shadow growled, its voice echoing like thunder. "The truth you seek is more terrible than the darkness that surrounds you." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He knew the entity was partly right. The truth could be devastating, but he could not back down now. With a determined look, he pulled his friends closer, forming a circle of strength and solidarity. "We need to get in," he shouted, deciding there would be no room for hesitation. "The truth is our only hope." The shadow, sensing their determination, charged forward with renewed fury. A strong, cold wind hit them, as if trying to drag them away. Lucas felt the force of darkness trying to separate the group, but he held onto the hands of his friends, each one looking into the eyes of the other, transmitting courage. "Together," he exclaimed, and the word reverberated in the darkness. "Let's go." They ran toward the library door, knowing that each step was a battle against the growing pressure of the shadow. When they finally crossed the threshold, the air inside the library was dense and heavy, as if the books themselves were bearing the weight of untold stories. The shelves loomed like silent sentinels, and the dim light of the candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the library, a large book was open on a pedestal, its yellowed pages seeming to pulse with an energy of their own. Lucas felt an irresistible pull toward it, as if the book were calling his name. But before he could move, the shadow followed them, transforming into a black cloud that spread across the walls. "You cannot escape the truth," the entity shouted, its voice now a cacophony of laughter and lament. "It will destroy you." Lucas looked at his friends, who seemed as lost as he felt, but he remembered the missing children, the pain he felt recalling each one. He could not let the shadow win again. "We need to find out what's happening," he said, his voice steadier than ever. "If the truth will destroy us, then we must face it head-on, With determination, he approached the book. The words on the pages seemed to glow, and he realized they were names, the names of the missing children. Each name was a story, a life interrupted by the shadow. He touched the page, and a wave of energy coursed through his body, making him feel the pain and joy of each of those souls. The shadow roared, its fury intensifying. "You cannot. Each of them is part of me now. They belong to the darkness." Lucas felt his heart race, but he did not back down. He was at a point of no return. "We do not belong to you," he shouted, and the words echoed in the library like a battle cry. "Our memories, our stories, belong to the light." With a swift motion, he began to recite the names aloud, each one beating like a drum in his mind. As the names left his lips, a light began to emanate from the book, growing more intense with each mention. The shadow hesitated, its distorted form writhing in agony. "No! This cannot be happening!" The entity screamed, now weaker, as if the light were burning its essence. "You cannot defeat me." But Lucas and his friends did not give up. Together, they united in a powerful chorus, shouting the names of the children in unison. The light expanded, filling the library with a blinding glow, and the shadow began to fade, like smoke in the wind. "You are nothing without the pain you carry," Lucas shouted, and his words sliced through the darkness like a sharp blade. "We are more than your shadows. We are hope." The light erupted in a wave of energy, and the shadow, finally, could resist no longer. A deafening scream echoed through the library as the entity disintegrated into particles, losing its form and influence. Lucas felt the pressure in the air lift, and the library, once suffocating, now seemed to vibrate with new life. When the light finally dissipated, Lucas and his friends stood panting, surrounded by a deep silence. The book, now closed, emanated an aura of peace. They had faced the darkness, and for a moment victory seemed to have been achieved. But as he looked around, Lucas realized that the battle was not completely over. The library still held secrets, and the memories of the missing children still needed to be honored. And as hope shone in their hearts, he knew that the journey was just beginning. They had faced the shadow and emerged stronger, but the true fight for truth and light was only just beginning to be revealed. Lucas and his friends stood amid the reverberating silence of the library, the echoes of the battle still pulsing in their hearts. The light had dissipated the shadow, but what remained was a space that now felt more like a sanctuary than a place of terror. However, the triumph was far from absolute. The emotional and physical scars left by the experience became immediately evident. Lucas's hand trembled as he touched the closed book, now at peace. The memory of the names he had spoken still resonated in his mind, laden with pain and love. He had freed the lost souls, but the price had been high. The shadow that had pursued them for so long had not left without leaving marks. The visions of the children, their laughter, and the whispers of their fears were now etched in his memory. Each name was a reminder of the fragility of life and the weight of the responsibility he carried. Beside him, Clara, his best friend, was pale, and a look of shock still dominated her face. She had been the first to shout the names alongside Lucas, but now the weight of the revelation crushed her. "We set them free," she murmured, but the uncertainty in her voice revealed the internal struggle she faced. Tears welled in her eyes, not only from relief, but from the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The sense of guilt and sorrow for the loss still weighed heavily on her heart. Their other friends, Pedro and Ana, were also momentarily in shock. What they had faced, the entity that had tried to stop them, was not something they could simply leave behind. Pedro, who was always the most optimistic of the group, now stared at the ground, his expression serious and distant. "What will happen to us now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He knew the answer would not be simple. The experience had changed them, and they could never go back to being the carefree people they once were. As the four of them recovered from the impact, the library began to transform. The once threatening shelves now seemed to whisper stories of hope and redemption. It was as if the very structure were alive, absorbing the light they had brought and turning darkness into memory. Yet, the feeling that something was still unresolved lingered in the air like a heavy, oppressive cloud. There were secrets yet to be revealed, truths that remained hidden in the shadows. Lucas stepped away from the group, feeling the need to process everything that had happened. He walked to a window, looking out at the night that still enveloped the city. The stars twinkled indifferent to what had occurred. He recalled each of the children, their faces, their voices, and a wave of sadness washed over him. The truth they sought was not just about the battle against the shadow, but about the lives that had been interrupted. He felt a pressure in his chest, a weight that could never be fully released. "Lucas," Clara called him, breaking the silence that surrounded him. He turned and saw the concern in her eyes. "Are you okay?" The question was more than simple worry. It was a quest for connection amid the chaos. He forced a smile, but the sincerity of his expression could not hold. What he felt was a mix of triumph and despair, as if victory had a bitter taste. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "I think I'll never really be okay after this." The truth was that the experience had marked him in a way he could not explain. The visions still danced in his mind, and the shadow, though defeated, seemed to have left a part of itself with him. As the days passed, the friends tried to resume their lives, but the library and the fight against the shadow followed them. They grew closer, yet more cautious, as if every laugh reminded them of the fragility of happiness. The emotional scars were deep and lasting, a constant reminder that darkness could always return. Lucas began to have disturbing dreams, visions of familiar faces now faded by loss and shadows twisting around them. He woke up sweating, heart racing, knowing that the battle had ended, but the internal war was far from over. He felt like a guardian, responsible not only for his own life, but for the souls he had freed. The truth haunted him, and he knew he could never completely escape what he had seen. The mystery of the library was not fully resolved. There were whispers of other books, other stories, waiting for those who dared to seek the truth, and Lucas knew that even if he wanted to, he could never fully distance himself from that journey. What happened that night had changed everything, and he was now a bearer of light in a world where darkness still lurked. Thus, as he looked to the future, Lucas realized that the true struggle was not just against external shadows, but against those that resided within him. The scars remained, but he also carried the strength of the stories he had freed, and as long as darkness could return, he was determined to face any shadow that crossed his path. What that night had taught was that light, even if faint, could always be reignited, and with that he would move forward, transformed but not broken. Lucas stepped away from the window, allowing the weight of the night to gradually dissipate. The library, which had once pulsed with a threatening energy, now felt like a refuge, a temple of memories and lessons. He observed his friends gathered, each lost in their own thoughts, and realized that the victory had been more than a simple battle against darkness. It was a journey that revealed the essence of who they were, both individually and as a group. He remembered the strength he felt when pronouncing the names of the children, the responsibility he carried in each word. That experience had shaped not only his character, but also his view on life and death, on light and shadow. The battle was not limited to a physical confrontation. It was an internal battle, a struggle against the fears and uncertainties that dwelled within him and his friends. As he watched Clara, Pedro, and Anna, Lucas understood that they were also fighting their own silent battles. Clara, with a lost gaze, reflected on what it truly meant to free souls. Pedro, who always brought hope to the group, now displayed a seriousness that resonated like an echo of the scars they bore. Anna, usually so vibrant, seemed to have lost part of her light, as if the experience had left a shadow on her spirit. The truth was that each of them was a reflection of what had happened. The fight against the shadow had not only united them, it had revealed what each of them carried within. The memories of laughter and carefree moments, now intertwined with the echoes of battle, creating a mosaic of experiences that none of them could simply ignore. Lucas recalled his own sleepless nights, the disturbing images that invaded his dreams and left him awake, lost in thought. The feeling of helplessness accompanied him like a persistent shadow. He knew that even if the library was at peace, the struggle within him and his friends was not resolved. There were questions hanging in the air, inquiries echoing against the silent walls of that magical structure, how to move forward, how to cope with the memories that now formed part of who they were. The silence of the library seemed to respond to those questions, inviting them to reflect. With each passing moment, Lucas understood that true growth came from accepting the dark parts of his experiences. He realized he could not simply bury what had happened, but that he should find a way to honor those memories. Each scar was a testament to courage, a reminder that light and darkness coexist within each of us, and that true strength lies in accepting this duality. As he walked back to his friends, he felt a new determination growing inside him. He wanted to share his reflections, to open the dialogue about the feelings everyone was trying to hide. Their journey would not end there. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would require them to continue supporting each other, to face the shadows that might still arise, both external and internal. Lucas began, his voice firm yet gentle. He knew that this had all been very difficult, and that they were all dealing with their own demons, but he felt that together they could find a way to move forward. The library had given them a new perspective, but they needed to work to keep the light alive within themselves. Clara looked at him, a spark of hope shining in her eyes. Pedro raised his head, and Anna beside him nodded slowly. There was a renewed connection among them, an understanding that the journey continued, not just as friends, but as survivors. They had faced the darkness and come out on the other side, but the battle for the light within them was still to come. The library, now quiet and welcoming, seemed to witness this exchange of promises. Lucas realized that what he had learned would be a guide in their future lives. Light might be fragile, but it was also resilient, and, by coming together, they could illuminate even the darkest corners of their souls. So, as the group gathered in a collective embrace, Lucas felt the certainty that, despite the scars and the memories, they were not alone. The questions that haunted them might not have easy answers, but the strength they would find in each other would lead them to a brighter future. The healing journey had begun, and together they would face whatever lay ahead with courage and love in their hearts.